Hi, everybody. This is John Reed with Enterprise Hits and Misses video show, The Great Cloud ERP Benefits Debate Part 2. Part 1 was our scintillating, devastating slideshow event last week. Um, and this is a little bit of a solo flight for now, though I may be welcoming a surprise guest on later. So just so you know, that could happen. But there's a reason why I wanted to come on today. And by the way, just so you know, usually I'm going to have a guest on my show, but every now and then I might wing it. The reason being that this particular show requires a little bit of prep for the guests for the jugular format, and every now and then I don't have time to get a guest fully prepped. But I got some good ones that I'm working on now for you for the weeks to come because I want to introduce you to a lot of people that we can have a good clash of ideas. But anyhow, I do have a little bit of a regret about last week's show, which was a really good show. I think Brian Summer did a bang up job with his slideshows on basically deconstructing cloud ERP vendor benefits versus what you really get, how to close the gap, and lots of project lessons and some horror stories as well. But I think my regret about that particular broadcast was that I wish I'd done a little bit of a better job of making clear that it is there is the art of the possible, and I know that Brian believes it too. He wrote a book about the importance of digital transformation, so it does matter. Um, and I'm not sure if we did a good job of getting that across. And it wasn't that we were too snarky. I think it was just more we were just being very very critical of sort of the hype around technology and cloud ERP in particular. And of course, it's really difficult to take a topic like cloud ERP because there's a ton of vendors in the space, and they're not all doing a good job, and they're not all serving their customers in the same way. So anyhow, I didn't necessarily want to apologize as much as say I think we kind of missed that a little bit in terms of the tone. And what I'm trying to do in the show is to kind of combine a really healthy kind of snark and cynicism with really hardcore sort of project lessons, and then also a little bit of inspiration because I think we need that too. I think it's morale is not easy right now. Let's face it, and we're not here just to tear things down. Obviously, we wouldn't be in this business if we didn't believe that we could make things better. Um, so with that in mind, one things I wanted to do here is to walk you through some different models for cloud ERP and how to kind of how customers think about transformations and how ERP fits into that. Because one things I've been writing about on Diginomica lately is that the ERP market is suddenly a lot more interesting than it once was. Because for a while there, it was super friggin' boring. Let's face it. I mean, it was a bunch of legacy vendors, cloud washing, crappy products, pretending like they were cloud when they were hosted crap. Their partners were milking their customers, and it just really wasn't a provocative space to be in when you compared some of the progress that a bunch of different SaaS areas, whether it's CRM or HCM, have made in the meantime. But I think ERP vendors are starting to catch up because they're starting to figure out that the cloud implies a much deeper transformation, and it also implies a different kind of focus. And it's not always cloud per se, but it's basically thinking about, basically how do we help our customers do better? Hey, Greg, welcome. I hope this is useful to you. I got some ideas to impart, but I'll take questions anytime as usual. So feel free to chime in the chat. Transformation in Cloud Festival. Yeah, I don't think it's a good call it a festival exactly. But I do want to walk you through kind of how this all evolved because I think it is sort of interesting. And at the core of my belief around all of this is that we're not getting enough value out of these ERP systems, and the reason off rarely comes down to technology. It really comes down to the fact that we're not pushing hard enough to extract the value once we go live, which is something I learned from my departed friend Michael Doan, but it always bears repeating, and it goes back to his green book for SAP, which he wrote many years before cloud ERP was a thing. We're not getting enough benefit after go live is what it comes down to, but there is so much more we can get. However, my view is it requires what I call a fierce collaboration between the customer and potentially a vendor partner, SI, and the vendor itself. And the best projects have that, and you can tell when you meet with those people, because you tell the kind of relationships they've forged, kind of forged in fire, so to speak. When I interview folks like that, there's always this honesty to how they talk to each other, and you can tell, like, yeah, we kind of been in the trenches of this product together, and we've learned how to talk honestly with each other and not bullshit. And that's a really big part, I think, of how these more successful projects come about. Greg, definitely, it's Friday. It's a festival. Absolutely, kick back, it's beer. One of the reasons I do this show on Friday is because I think the style of the show is definitely a Friday vibe. Um, I just wrote a piece on Diginomica castigating virtual events yet again for being boring and horrific. And one thing I never want to do on this particular show is bore you, though I fully acknowledge that when it's just me talking about myself, I'm running that risk. uh, anyway, before I get into sort of this evolution of cloud ERP benefits for you and walk you through my thinking there, I want to step back and just talk a little bit about when a company approaches the issue of transformation. I think they actually have to start by thinking about where they want to go in the long run in their industry. What kind of company do they want to be, and how are they going to excel? How are they going to serve their customers better? And we kind of use the word customers now, but it really should be employees and partners. It should be everything, right? Like you can use customer in a variety of segments, I guess, in that sense. How are we going to do that? What are we going to stand for? Right? I mean, I think it's really way too problematic in this world right now for companies not to stand for something. I mean, I think we're going through a period right now where big tech is getting castigated for its sort of conflicting approaches to privacy versus their business models and so on. Let's see what Greg is drinking. Center of the Universe Brewing in Ashland, Virginia. Orange Blossom Honey Ale. Cheers, Greg. I've only got my water bottle. I didn't even get my coffee going, so we'll see if I can hold up. But anyway, so a company's got to take positions on some things, I think, these days. I mean, some of the companies I like to cover the most, I mentioned Zoho in my piece today. They're a privately held company that is really resolute about certain values. And you can decide whether you like that or not. But in my mind, I find that refreshing. I think it can be difficult for publicly held companies to take such strong stances, but it can be done. And then I think about a company like Acumatic, which is a cloud ERP company I just wrote about, where they have a customer bill of rights that they put out there. And while you might say, well, that's a marketing gimmick, yeah, perhaps, but it's also a transparent way of holding themselves accountable to things like price increases and stuff like that. And so part of what you're trying to do is figure out what you stand for. And then in most cases, you're going to do a bit of a gap analysis of sorts where you realize, like, we probably need to transform and keep improving in order to live up to the ideals that we espouse. So you have this core philosophy, but you also have to continue to live up to it all the time. I think that's one thing I feel really strongly about with Diginomica and my guys, my team there, is we have to keep changing, and we have to keep evolving. So yeah, we might have a core of things that we believed in, but we got to always push it. And so I think that's a piece of it too. And then for large enterprises, which is sort of our focus, right? Like, now you have to figure out, okay, you've taken a stance on transformation. Well, what type of transformation is it going to be? And what is the role of technology? And obviously technology is going to play a role in it. But I think you have to think about what that means from a future of work perspective, from a robotics perspective, from an AI perspective. Are you going to be all about ruthless efficiency? Or are you going to take a more life-affirming position on the future of work? I think these are really, really important considerations. And I think, like, there was this thing on, Amazon right now. I'm always crushing them for what they're doing with their sort of gig economy approach to delivery. But they had this article recently that I tweeted about how, some of these workers are peeing in bottles because they have to meet their metrics while they're driving. So, like, to me, that's not a very life affirming vision of the future of work. And that as soon as those, humans can be replaced by drones or what have you, they're gone. And, so you have to take some positions on those things. And then within that context, you're going to take a position on ERP and ERP's role in that transformation. And I think that's one of the points that Brian and I were trying to get out last week, is that in the case of ERP, the transformation is not always going to be centered around your ERP system as much as the vendors might want that to be the case. So there is a very strong case I think you can make for a modern ERP platform being sort of the driver for your transformation. But I think there's an important caveat there that I'll get to in a moment. Um, but there are other models. The a very common model is the ring fence your ERP systems model, and there's actually two flavors of that. One is a SaaS vendor flavor, and SaaS vendors, whether it's Salesforce or any number of SaaS players, have taken the position that transformation, the action lies elsewhere. It lies in supply chain software. It lies in CRM or customer success software. It doesn't lie in ERP. So yeah, just put your ERP system, put it on some third-party maintenance or put it on some support. Let it do what it does. Let it be a back office system, and we'll pull data out of it to fuel the transformation efforts. Now, what's really, really dangerous for ERP vendors, if when ring fencing models take hold, is that little chunks get taken out. Like maybe a vendor like Coupa takes out some of the procurement stuff from the ERP system. Maybe Salesforce takes out the CPQ, configure, price, quote stuff. So gradually, that ring fenced ERP gets smaller and smaller. And I think that's one reason why you see ERP vendors like busting their chops to not get caught with customers in a ring fence model. But sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes that's what customers want to do, and that's how they want to proceed with their transformation. Let's see what Greg has to say about this. It seems like there's a greater board level focus beyond transactional systems, more focus on ROI TCO that enables some kind of differentiator. Now we have some enterprise focus on holding the vendors of ERP more accountable, even possibly holding the SIs accountable. Absolutely, Greg, and that's a really big deal. One of the big debates that's come out of the SAP Rise offering, which combines like the hyperscaler and SAP on one contract for the purposes of things like upgrading and landscape optimization, is what is the role of SI and how can we make the SIs more accountable? And that's a very, very common theme. And to your point, Greg, the other sort of ring fencing model, I think, has less to do with transactional SaaS and more to do with analytics. So, for example, I interviewed a customer the other day, a good data customer. The article is not out yet, but they're doing all kinds of very impressive real-time analytics in the transportation sector, and they're pulling from all kinds of back-end systems, including their ERP system. But in this case, you would argue that the analytics vendor is really the strategic vendor of choice here, that they're investing the most, and that's what their executives are looking at and their managers are looking at. And I warn ERP vendors about that quite a bit because I'm getting pinged on Twitter for something silly. I'll have to look at it later. So I warn ERP vendors about this a lot because if your analytics vendor is really taking over the strategic part of that relationship from you, then you're essentially just a transactional data repository. And Greg, to your point, I don't think you get a lot of traction with your board if you're perceived as just a transactional system. Now, what are ERP vendors doing to combat that? They're doing any number of things, right? They're providing their own analytics tools. I mean, in my mind, where we need to go with that is a much more embedded format, because I don't think ERP vendors can totally compete on best of breed analytics offerings and best of breed planning offerings. But I think where they can potentially compete is by embedding that type of stuff in the software. That's a lot tougher for the third-party analytics providers to do. So that I'm kind of seeing that information all the time in the context of the screens that I'm working on. And collaboration could potentially work the same way, though there's all kinds of pitfalls in trying to build your own collaboration software, as many ERP vendors have learned the hard way. But there may be some ways of combining that where in some cases maybe you partner with vendors like Teams or Slack or what have you, and figure out how to have a bit of both, where the user lives out of both a collaboration environment and the ERP environment. But the point is, the more the ERP vendors can succeed in making their sort of daily interface, the portal for more strategic and collaborative work, not just transactional work, the better off that they're going to be in the long run to combat that model. So those are some of the main transformation models that companies can undertake. I would argue that there's a really important additional model that more of them need to look at, which is not ERP as back office or modern ERP, but ERP as industry solution, which is really about building out cloud-based industry solutions that are actually as functional as anything on premise. Oh, Dennis is only getting captions. Oh, man, you probably don't want to hear this anyway, Den. Um, okay. Let's go through a couple of comments. Dennis says he's only getting captions. Sorry, dude. I don't know how to fix that. Um, I guess you could go on to one of the other platforms. Um, I will put a link in there. There's like it's running on Facebook Diginomica, Facebook John ERP. It's running on my YouTube channel, and I don't know if there's only captions there, but there might be audio there. Give it a go. So there's a link to the YouTube version. Anyway, who knows what the hell's going on with the captions? I don't know what the hell to tell you guys about that. So anyway, those are the different kind of models of transformation. So I don't even think companies can even afford to think about ERP in general and what they want to do with it until they've embraced those things around how they want to serve their customers better and what form of transformation are they going to undertake. What is the role of ERP and all of that? And those decisions are not easy to make, right? And they need to be made in the context of consultation with all kinds of trusted advisors who don't have uh, any skin in the game as far as selling some massive bloated project. Um, so moving a little bit on with this whole program, um, this all kind of started for me. I had spent a number of years on Diginomica documenting cloud ERP use cases, and a lot of them were in the mid market, which in some ways, mid market ERP has advantages because you can really put everything on one platform without the legacy spaghetti that the large enterprises have to contend with. Um, but when I initially wrote about cloud ERP benefits, it was, let me just tell you what year, 2017. What are the top 5 cloud ERP benefits? And I said, it's not a miraculous cure all, but looking back, I see some notable benefits. Um, and so, anyhow, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but they have to do with things like getting out of spreadsheet hell and the journey towards a single source of truth, which is something that Brian and I thoroughly deconstructed last week as far as how difficult it is to get there. Simplifying tools improves adoption. A lot of this is an adoption challenge as well. Anyway, I had a whole bunch of different use cases that I illustrated. Um, uh, one of them was a nonprofit panel for Sage Intact, where a bunch of nonprofits were stuck on these outdated on-premise systems that people had to log into some of them one at a time, for example. And so for companies like that, obviously turning the lights on in a cloud ERP system is a huge benefit in and of itself. Um, and then there's the journey away from clunky customizations into platforms and applications. And then we talk about a modern UI. Well, why do you need that? You need it for talent and recruitment. You need it for productivity. And then data visibility leads to a different way of running the business. And so once you start getting to that, now you're really starting talking about more advanced benefits. And it starts with role-based dashboards, obviously, and things like that, but it can get much deeper. You can start looking at alerts and decision support and start thinking about what the data is telling you, how you can. I did a piece a little while ago about a vendor that they're consulting firm, but they totally changed their services lineup when they finally could see what services were profitable and which are not, which sounds like obvious, but it's amazing how many companies don't have that visibility. Anyway, those are the kinds of things that we've seen as kind of a foundation around why these systems can be valuable. But one thing that we keep running into at Diginomica is how many of these customers don't ever achieve those things. And so that was kind of the subject of Brian's brilliant slideshow last week. Uh, so Den's out. He's got to have voice. No worries, dude. But if anyone else is caption only, let me know. I'd be curious to know how technically dysfunctional that is out there. So hey, Greg, if you're still watching, if you have a cam, let me know. Might have you come on for a little bit talk about what you're working on. But anyway, I wanted to sort of continue along with this thread because so I wrote this piece in 2017. What are the top 5 cloud ERP benefits? And then in 2018, I wrote Cloud ERP isn't a handshake deal. It's a value extraction challenge. Here are the stages. And so in that piece, I attempted to really define stage by stage vision of how to achieve value in cloud ERP. Now, as Brian Summer pointed out to me, there's a bit of a flaw. Switched. Okay, Thomas says all good video and audio. Switched off the annoying captions. Okay, so I guess LinkedIn is serving up caption videos now. I guess they probably think they're being helpful to accessibility and all. Sorry if it's annoying. I didn't realize that before I went live, so there might be a way for me to help people adjust that easily, but I don't know. Greg says, analytics within an industry solution is an avenue that ERP vendors miss. They focus on the presentation of analytics, which is important, but the most value is where analytics tie to decision making. Clarity as to where an analytics set ties to explicit decision is a rare thing in the world or enterprise IT. Greg, I agree with that. And one of the things we've been pushing vendors on is how to come up with embedded benchmarks so that throughout your software, when you're working on stuff, you're constantly being made aware of, especially if you're a manager in a particular role. Hey, you're 5% off the industry average in this area, or did you know that some of the other folks in your industry are doing better on net 30 payment terms or what have you. A lot of this information is available, especially for properly run SaaS ERP systems. Now you have to overcome certain issues around privacy and data aggregation, but it can be done. But to your point, Greg, it's not being done nearly enough. And if ERP vendors don't find a way to usefully aggregate, embed, and relay that information to customers, then they're going to lose that strategic vantage point to analytics vendors, and then, as I described, customers, as they map their transformation strategies, are going to choose to ring fence their ERP vendors because they won't have a seat at the board table anymore, which is sort of to your point. Let's see what other comments. Greg, you have a camera. Cool. So Greg, stand by for a little bit. What I'll probably do is send you a message with a link on LinkedIn, but I want to get through a little more of my material. So hopefully you can hang out for a little bit and then we can talk about it. And then people are asking how to turn the captions off. That's a CC button in the bottom right of the screen. So I'm glad we got the caption stuff sorted. Welcome, Thomas, to the chat. Always nice to have you here. Thomas, I'm in the middle of walking through my cloud ERP benefits methodology, but this could also apply to your area of focus, CRM, in many ways, although you would have to adapt it. So feel free to chime in, and I hope you guys join Thomas in his CRM Convos videos, which are quite good. So then in 2018, I wrote the piece, Cloud ERP isn't a handshake deal. It's a value extraction challenge. Here are the stages. And once again, my whole theme was that go live and kind of standardize and simplifying tools and such like that. That's fine, but that's not enough. I mean, you see that in the large enterprise space. I just did a use case interview where a company is bogged down in a global ERP setup where they had so much customization and so much regional variation, so much M&A and activity, and so many different ERP systems that, I mean, it was just, they're basically not operationally efficient. They're just confused. And they're arguing about numbers all the time. So for them, like consolidating all of that stuff into one global standard system is in itself a big benefit. For smaller companies, it has to do with things like getting out of spreadsheet chaos. When you have a single source of truth approach, you can do more problem solving and less trying to gather the numbers and struggle with the numbers. And so that's the beginning of the benefits, but I think it really levels off a lot of times. And and companies don't take it far enough. And so what I did is I identified first three stages in cloud ERP value achievement. One is the immediate gains, like I talked about, by consolidating disparate systems on a user-friendly platform. The second is increased decision support and benefits of data visibility in real time via a single source of truth. And dashboarding is a hallmark of this phase, but dashboarding is just a stage in creating truly actionable data. Beyond that is stuff, because a lot of folks, look, they don't really like dashboarding and they criticize it. They say it's shiny toys for executives, and it's how do you actually make better decisions is the key, right? Um, but beyond dashboarding, you have the potential for an alerts infrastructure, automating routine decisions, and so on. And most ERP customers are not there yet. They're maybe into the dashboarding a little bit, but they're not that far. And then the third phase is achieving new business opportunities through a more agile and open platform, pursuing new markets by analyzing and applying the data. And very few cloud ERP customers I've ever interviewed are truly knee deep into that third stage. So that's why I'm trying to push people to look at this issue and push vendors to do more. Anyway, the article breaks out the stages in much more detail. One of the big ones is labor reallocation into higher value tasks. So instead of just reducing headcount and going for operational efficiency, how can you position people into roles where they're making more of a difference for customers and employees and so forth? Um, now, what happened recently was I decided to revisit this piece because I thought, well, what have I missed, right? And so that's sort of where I arrived at recently, and why I did that show with Brian last week was the beginning of thinking about, well, it's been 2 years. What else do we need to be talking about here? And I did come up with a few areas and a few problems. And let's see what we have in the chat. Thomas says, Cloud ERP isn't the main advantage that customers need to rethink how different they really are as opposed to focusing on their specifics. Yeah, well, and I think that's true for a lot of various kinds of software. I mean, um, the whole push to standard is about acknowledging that you're not necessarily as unique in a lot of your processes, and that you should really only be spending money differentiating in areas where you are unique. And beyond that, you should not be disqualifying yourself from future upgrades and absorbing new functionality in order to achieve that uniqueness. Now, one thing I did not mention earlier that fits into the whole transformation philosophy is that what is your IT philosophy is a really big part of that also. Do you even maintain an internal IT team? Do you have development talent? Are you going to rely on partners for that? How is that going to work? So that's the other thing, because some customers are very, very oriented towards high growth cloud models, don't have a lot of internal IT. Business users run the operation. These are the low code junkies, right? And that's one of the things I didn't get into in my first piece because, well, low code wasn't a thing 2 years ago as much as it is now. But I mean, I talked about the whole thing around automation and stuff, but I do think I could have spent more time in that last piece on workflow automation. And since then, I've done a couple of use cases on that topic that fascinated me, where business users were able to automate a bunch of workflows without any interference or support from IT. Well, that's a pretty big deal. I think that's a notable benefit of a cloud ERP, um, a modern, what I would consider a modern cloud ERP product. Greg says no enterprise is unique as they think they are, especially in the common business functions supporting their core business reason for existence. Absolutely. Um, some very good comments here. Greg, Thomas says if they can afford to be so. In my experience, many businesses build customizations where industry standard is fine, as a place where they invest does not result in positive differentiation. And Thomas, this is one of the big things in the ERP universe in general that's been a huge problem historically, is that there's always a consulting partner willing to build out customizations and uncritically do that for as much revenue as they can make from a client. And hey, maintaining the customizations is fun and expensive work too. Whereas in reality, they should be functioning more like you're describing, which is advising very firmly with customers, hey, did you know that this is the standard process in your industry and you should adapt it also, and here's why. And then here's an area where you really could have competitive advantage, and here's where you might invest either some development resources or what have you. Um, let's see. Greg responds to Thomas, yes, complexity without explicit enterprise value should be a red flag in any organizations, even when it is not IT, but when it is IT, it grows fast and wild indeed. Yes, and Thomas says when it is not IT, it is often yet another cloudy point solution, increasing shadow IT. Right, and the point solution approach is ultimately gonna backfire on companies, and it's really a reaction to the fact that the software that they were being served up is crappy, but the point solution eventually creates more headaches than it solves, and that's absolutely true. So what else is wrong with my 2018 article on cloud ERP benefits? Well, there's a few other things that I found that have changed out significantly for me. So one thing I did is I talked about Brian Summer in detail, and he made a really important point, which is that this notion that after you go live, you should keep pushing for benefits. He agrees, but he has this caveat, which is that your initial configuration, how you initially configure your systems, is really important. And he's seen a lot of situations where if you don't anticipate where you're going to go properly, you're going to have to redo all the config later. So that's a really important caveat here to this notion of continuing to advance in your benefits, is that you do have to have a solid vision from the beginning. So that's one really key point that I missed the first time around. I already told you that I missed some of the workflow automation, low code stuff. I should have done a better job with that than I did at the time. And then another thing that I did is I put a call out to vendors to share their maturity models with me, because I said, well, cloud ERP vendors, please step up and provide examples of how you're helping customers get to these more advanced stages, because too many of them, I think, are relaxing into the fact that they don't have to work off spreadsheets and 10 versions of QuickBooks anymore or whatever. But that, frankly, is, in my mind, not enough. And so the first one to take me up on it was Acumatica, and I interviewed their CEO, and they provided their maturity model for me, which I published in an article you can look at on the site. So it's just do a search for John Reed and Acumatica and Cloud ERP value. You'll find it. I'm not going to pimp another link in the chat. I've done enough of that today. So anyway, I'd love to see other vendors propose this also and show, because one thing that John Roskell, Acumatica's CEO, acknowledged to me is that they have a chunk of customers who are not pushing ahead, and they're eager to kind of engage them further in what else they can do with the product. The other thing that I think I really missed before, that I really take very, very seriously now, is this notion of vertical ERP. And to explain that, I want to, I've had this whole thing around the future of cloud ERP as vertical. What does that really mean? I mean, it's like a catchphrase, but seriously, like, how many catchphrases do we need? So I wrote a piece on Unit 4 because they have a important new ERPX release coming out pretty soon. And I want to read you this paragraph I wrote about industry ERP. And a lot of it was based on the fact that Unit 4 is making a lot of play around its next-gen microservices-based ERP architecture. Now, I'm not necessarily going to tell you that microservices-based architectures are definitively the future, but I would generally agree that a more modern user interface with loads of APIs and ability to play nicely with other programs, and less about any particular discrete area of clunky ERP is going to work better in the long run. Exactly how vendors are going to get there, we're going to see. So I'm going to read you this in a sec, but I want to catch up on the chat first, because we have a couple of very interesting chatters here between Greg Robinette and Thomas Webernet. Let's see here. Greg says, maybe the SI model for charging should include an explicit value-based cost value formula that if the value is not delivered, the SI does not get paid. Well, I totally agree with that, and there has been a little more of a pursuit of outcome-based models, and I don't think we've heard the end of it yet. Um, you know, some roadblocks I've seen come up to that for obvious reasons, but I don't think we've heard the end of outcome-based consulting. Thomas says he agrees. The challenge with this is the same as software vendors not going into value-based pricing. Indeed, but it may be the kind of thing where a disruptive vendor can step in and do that. So, Greg, I'm going to send you a video link in just a few minutes. Have you come on to this discussion? But before I do that, I want to share with you guys this take that I did on this Unit 4 piece because it illustrates uh, this. Now, keep in mind when I read this to you, this is really not about the pros and cons of Unit 4 that I want you to take away from this. It's the industry piece. So anyway, they talked a lot about the sub verticals that they want to cover. I said many cloud ERP companies speak in terms of next gen architectures these days, intelligent platforms, multi-tenancy, workflow automation, low code, and such. Alas, some still use glossy language to cloud wash legacy architectures, or they talk of private cloud solutions even your grandmother wouldn't host. I tend to believe, however, that in the longer view, and this is the really important point, modern ERP architecture will be table stakes, a requirement for vendors to compete, which is contrary to how most marketing departments for ERP vendors, by the way, position themselves now. Will Unit 4 be able to stay out in front of that? Perhaps if they pursue their market services-based automation plans with vigor, since only a handful of ERP vendors are talking microservices right now. So then I say, well, what's the obvious question, right? The obvious question is, if ERP vendors don't ultimately win based on modern architecture, well, then how will they excel? I believe the ERP winner's circle of the future will be all about vertical niches. That means providing software that not only runs your back office, this is the really important point here, but your industry software without undue functionality compromises when you move from your proprietary industry software. And you guys know what kind of industry software I'm talking about. Like a lot of times it's old school green screen legacy stuff. It's so difficult to integrate. Shop floor systems almost always qualify for this. All kinds of shop floor machinery that can't talk to anything else. It might not even be on the MES system. The MES system can't talk with the ERP system. That's something that Plex is trying to break down, by the way, the breakdowns between MES and ERP. I just wrote about IFS. They're trying to do the same with EAM, asset management, same kind of stuff. Break down the walls between that and ERP, all in the service of a more real-time view of servicing the customer. Put field service management in there as well and get rid of all the three-letter acronyms entirely. But anyway, with the industry software silo eradicated, you can get really serious about automating processes, pulling analytics, and layering AI and collaboration tools on top of that. And the point here is you can't call that kind of ERP back office because your vertical system is now fully integrated into that. And I know ERP vendors will claim that they have that today, but in a lot of industries, especially in micro verticals, very specific vertical segments, that doesn't exist in a modern format. So it's now your business background. And another key point, it's not just software. It's absolutely not just software. Pulling that off means assembling advisory services partners who are expert in that industry, customer success teams for that industry, and eventually user communities around each sub vertical. That combination just doesn't exist in many industries and micro verticals today. And so that's the key point I want to make today about what I kind of missed in my last piece a couple years ago that I think is so critical now. Yes, some customers aren't thinking industry ERP yet, even though they're updating their ERP, but they absolutely should be, because you really can't talk about, don't give me any AI bullshit if you can't have an integrated, easily modernized industry and ERP system. And in most cases, I think they should be combined. Perhaps in some cases they'll be separate, but in general, if ERP vendors want to be relevant, which is the whole thing we're talking about modern ERP, I think they need to tackle industry and not just be finance. If they're just going to be finance, they're probably going to be back office. I mean, what Brian talked about last week about cost accounting and why cost accounting needs to get much more sophisticated for the factory of the future, that implies that the two systems talk to each other and that the cost accounting and the manufacturing software coexist in a harmonious way. Otherwise, you can't have modern cost accounting at all. Okay, now I'm going to bring Greg on in just a couple minutes. Greg, I'm going to hang on one sec, guys, and keep commenting for a moment. I am going to pull an invite link for you. And Greg, I'm going to find you on LinkedIn right now. And LinkedIn's taking a little while to load. Sorry, folks, this is real-time life. Let's see if Greg's already in my messages. Greg. No, you are not. Why not? Greg Robinette. There you go. Greg Robinette. And I'm going to message you now. Greg, I just sent you the back-end login link. Just go ahead and log in there, and then I'll pull you onto the live stream. And now I'm going to catch up on the comments. Thank you, folks, for waiting for that. Let's see. LinkedIn user says, everything you have said is spot on. I'm struggling to comment without just saying, yeah, I'm working on it. Well, look, we're all working on it. I mean, some of this is somewhat ambitious. And actually, I'm planning a show coming up on sort of future ERP and what that's going to look like. But that's a different show. Greg, I'll be pulling you on in just one sec. Thanks for the Acumatica CEO link, Mark. I appreciate that because I didn't want to pimp anything else into the chat today. But if you want to pimp it, that's great. And there is Greg. Greg, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you?
Excellent. Yes, you are live, Greg. Thank you.
How exciting.
Yeah, this is nice. Greg and I have quite a bit of history. I think I met you. Was it when I was the editor of SAP Tips?
Yes.
Yeah, and you wrote some fantastic HR articles back, old school SAP HR.
Yeah, back a while ago.
Yeah. So what kind of projects do you work on these days?
So I'm actually with one of my original clients when I started doing SAP consulting, Newport News Shipbuilding in Newport News, Virginia. We build aircraft carriers and submarines.
Cool. A very old school SAP customer.
Yeah, going back to 1999, and I mean we've got some really good positive things with SAP, and of course some of the things that are tougher. But right now we just got done with an S4 conversion, the brownfield conversion of, I believe we were the first A&D customer to do everything, not just finance. So it was very interesting, and you know, I probably have a reputation for bashing the ERP vendors every now and then and the SIs, but I will say, you know, we rely on SAP as a core product. It does a great job for what we do. It's very complex to build an aircraft carrier. Just so to give the scale of it, it's it's in the tens of millions of hours of work which you have to track to a contract detail level, and it's billions and billions of parts. And a part for an aircraft carrier may not be the same price as a part for a destroyer or a submarine. So every individual piece of information tied to each individual part that goes into building a ship has its own unique characteristics. And all of that is tracked by SAP. So it's very powerful. It does work. Now, having said that, we do struggle sometimes with dealing with the legacy choices we made. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, what I'm doing. So
very interesting. And when you talk about like legacy choices, without getting too specific on your project necessarily, what do you think, like old school, in this case SAP, it could be any ERP, but in the case of SAP, what kind of legacy choices do customers grapple with? Like, they got this great functionality right in your vertical that SAP built, but what are the legacy aspects that can be difficult?
So, and whether it's SAP or any other vendor, they have a design, a functional design for their product. Mm-hmm. And once you start customizing it and you start building on top of that as the years go by, the assumption when they come present you with new functionality is that you have in some way incorporated their core design. So wherever you've customized, or even in user controlled configuration items that aren't like code customization.
Right.
They assume you're going to use a certain foundational pattern or design for that. And when you don't, you get all this new functionality, which is often presented at senior levels. And it's like, oh, this will work great. And then when you go to look actually having to deploy it, the foundational configurations may not exactly work. And so you go take a look at what those trigger. And then, of course, all your custom code, in our case, it's over 20 years worth of, SAP time. All your custom code was designed, developed, and deployed with that foundational configuration. And that was one of the issues we ran in with S4. And I will say SAP provided some really good tools for when we went through to analyze everything. They actually have come up with a pretty nice suite of tools to do the S4 conversion. And we were able to identify a bunch of custom code because we had 20 years under our belt. Millions and millions of line of custom code that we were able to resolve through the S4 project. And that sets us for a foundation going forward. Now, part of the way you get there is, if anybody was around a while back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there's a lot of deployments of all ERPs that were, oh, you want to take your old system and make it be the same in our new system. Yeah, we can do that for you. And it's based upon the model of billable hours. I do still run into that, and that's a problem. So recovering from that binge of customization, and we can build your old system in a new system, even if it doesn't make any sense, from 1997, 98 through about 2010. In my experience, that is a big cost item. I don't think companies really think about that until they get into the nuts and bolts of like moving to the cloud. Whatever. My experience with AWS is more just research, but some of the tools I've seen there, you can really bypass some of the historical legacy issues that you may have built for your enterprise. And that's what I think some of the cloud opportunities are. And I don't know that they've been marketed particularly well because it's hard to break away from the traditional marketing from, the early 2000s, the first 20 years of the 2000s. There's a specific marketing perspective that I think the ERP and the ecosystem built around them use. And that's a dynamic that needs to shift, where tied more to value. When we were talking about the industry verticals, you have a ring fence back office. If you're one of the legacy ERP companies who specialize in verticals, and you come up with a differentiated vertical, you'll win that market. Nobody wants to screw around with having to rebuild integrations, even if it requires resolving the legacy stuff, because at some point, whether you bounce off of your current ERP or go to another one, you're going to have to deal with that legacy stuff.
Yep. Absolutely. Mark has a quick comment about my Ollie picture. Yes, it is one of the greatest sports photos. It's I have a small collection of sports photography. This one's my favorite. And then Greg Thomas says, "What do you do there? Variant config on a grand scale?"
No, I'm involved in variant config on a grand scale. Is not a bad way to describe it. I'm the what we call the tower systems architect for all things. It's called ERP solutions. It's not just SAP, but it spans across SharePoint and a bunch of other integration components. So it's a little bit bigger, where I was SAP specific as a consultant. And then when I came here, that was my role, but I've morphed into a bigger role. As an example, for our S4 project, I pretty much was the cutover lead and the solution design guy, and whether it's third-party add-ons or our foundational levels, just managing all that, it just takes a lot of time. And we had a good team. So I'm pretty amazed, actually. When you're in the middle of a big project like that, it's like, this can't possibly be successful. And as you grind through it, we actually came out of it pretty well. And actually, really a pretty good effort by our company, and with some help, we got it done.
Congrats! It's definitely a major achievement, especially given the mission critical stuff that you produce. So, were there any surprising lessons? I mean, I know that there's classic lessons around like change management, and we already covered the custom code thing, but anything surprise you that you were like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd paid attention to that?
Personally, yeah, but that's just because I didn't pay attention to what I should have. But overall, for a project, just kind of more internal cultural stuff. We're we have one customer. So anything that affects the relationship with that customer, everybody's very careful about. And there was a lot. I mean, if you haven't been through an S4 conversion, it essentially resets all the underlying data and structures for your finances. It is a pretty big deal. So when you go do that, both the business and your customer are very interested in how that works out. And we did. It actually went really well. There was a lot of diligence by both the business and IT working in partnership. Which no company always has that. We just were able to say this is important, and everybody got aligned to it. Some of the bigger surprises were as we were going through it, just matching up foundational elements like your product versions, your component versions with third parties. The way things are released is the third party providers get that at the same time you do. So we're going, and we were pushing our schedule. We were working to move. We were right on the cutting edge. We're in 1909, and it came out in, I think, September. And October, we were installing it in our first cutover, first sandbox system. And we do have third-party products that provide specific value. And we're like, okay, have you got this done yet? Have you got this done yet? And so we were able to, that was a little bit where in my experience, and I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, but that SAP worked with the third-party vendors and like kind of gave them a pre-release and allowed them a little ramp-up time. That didn't appear to happen.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you described is that I think you're part of the way towards achieving the values I was talking about, and it's a big victory for a vendor like SAP to get you to this point, because before you're in the legacy versions. Now you're on S4, and in the process, you've gone through some pretty painful standardization exercises. The thing that helps you going forward is, even though you're not like full cloud or what have you, you're in a much better position still to absorb new functionality. And secondly, now you can really look at the data platform aspects and really look at what you can do from an analytics standpoint, and how you can pull data more easily from the system or attach to collaboration tools like you described. There's a lot of things you can talk with SAP about now that you couldn't before. But I think what's interesting about it is that it's still on the vendor, in this case SAP, but it could be any ERP vendor, to demonstrate now what it can do for you. Like, so in my mind, it's not over yet, right? Like, we think, oh, we're live on S4, but it's like, in my mind, if you do this right, this is just the beginning. And if 2 years from now you and I are talking, we should be having a totally different conversation about the value you're achieving.
So one of the business drivers was being able to utilize some new functionality that SAP has in the planning, engineering, and operations. Mm-hmm. That was, and that's I can't really go into a lot of the details, but that is one of the key things. And SAP has been a great partner in figuring that out. It's a tricky area. Just want to mention to folks too is we don't really have the option of using cloud products as most companies do. Right. We're very, very restricted in
exactly
our security footprint. So everything we do is generally something that's within our span of control. So some of the options that might be there that just make common sense to a lot of other companies is not really available to us. So that is always a challenge for us. And I would say SAP was a very good partner in understanding that. And that's not true of all vendors. They're like, well, why don't you just let us do this? I'm like, sorry, can't. So I would like to throw them a little compliment for that.
Yeah, I cut aerospace and defense companies a lot of slack when it comes to their resistance to cloud, where I usually give companies a hard time about what I consider sort of fake privacy and data concerns. But aerospace and defense is a different story entirely. What do you think about sort of the impact of collaboration on your company and your industry? Because, like, obviously, especially in the remote workforce, but in general, like, collaboration tools have really taken hold. What does that look like for you guys?
So it's more like working groups, and I've seen an uptick in like reaching out and having not conferences, but meetings with people. They're still fairly siloed within the industry. I think there's some huge opportunities as a total pivot. I'm going to say this, and you can't get mad, but okay. there is a value-based model.
You see your pivot. Oh, right. Yeah.
No, not just pivot. This one. This is the one. A value-based use for blockchain.
Oh, here we go. Oh,
But
man.
not related to
Oh,
cryptocurrency at all. Okay.
you're
And
treading on thin ice
I
with the
know, I know.
blockchain use case. Let's hear about your blockchain use case, Greg.
So
Let's hear
a
about it.
lot of aerospace and defense requires, essentially, it's a form of supply chain provenance, but it requires being able to show that the source of whatever it is, even sometimes back to the foundational materials, your steel or your raw materials, all the way through the delivery for very specific things within a contract, you have to show up to like drawings. It has to have physical signatures. I've seen some of them that have books that are like 2 or 3 ring binder books that are like 12 inches by 14 inches, and then they're 8 or 9 inches thick of signatures, acceptances, and transfers. It's a huge overhead, and that's how the contracting requirements are met. Every single one of those signatures and stuff, there's nothing really technologically preventing a group of A&D suppliers that are partnered together to say we're going to form our own distributed ledger that links just this particular supply chain. Mm-hmm. And every transaction you could take a picture of, some piece of information that's relevant to the component, and then that goes into your distributed ledger that this group is in. Somebody validates it. You've got the immutable signature from a blockchain. Now I don't need to take a picture or wait for me to pass the book along or FedEx it or whatever they do. It goes with the material, and it's a scannable thing. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Just on my own, I kind of been playing around with like non-fungible token type things that you could actually attach to things, not because that's generated and linked to the blockchain. And I don't know enough of the technical components that I may not be describing it right, but the concept fits. And all of a sudden we've reduced a whole lot of non-value overhead. The only value right now is the provenance value, which is important from a contract perspective. But if we can take all of that clutter that ties that together out and streamline it to an electronic immutable transfer, that would be great. I mean, if I had spare time, I would try to figure that out in value terms for not just our organization but other ones. But that's kind of one of the things I would look at.
Well, first I got to give you applause because you got away with using the words pivot and blockchain within 15 seconds of each other on my show without getting booted off cam. And look, so with the blockchain piece, do you know of is there any pilots going on in your industry around this, or just people kind of loosely talking about it, or where are you at?
I think there are. I just have not had time to really reach out and look at anything. I mean, I was so interested. I went ahead and, kind of studied it up and worked some hyperledger fabric things. And there were some folks that responded back to when I was talking about it, but I just haven't had the time. I hope so. I mean, it's just my personal interest. I think it's really a high value for a lot of different companies within the A&D space. A consortium where everybody was using the same kind of distributed ledger, where you come up with how that would work. If I was running a line of business still, that's something I'd say, okay, let's invest that. I think it's a multi-million-dollar target that you could do, and it would be worth some investing and putting together, a consortium. But I don't do that anymore, so I'm focused on, getting the chips built by having the good systems. But when my mind is awake at night, it intrigues me and something I would want to do.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of fits in with kind of why I have steered away from blockchain talk on the show for the most part, which is not, people think it's like a hostility to blockchain. It's really more that I'm trying to focus on what people are already using at scale. And obviously in this case, we don't even have a pilot project to talk about yet, but I don't object to the use cases when they're clearly defined in an industry setting. And especially when you look at, if there's a community of, say, suppliers that share a collective need for transparency, that is a prime candidate for some form of distributed ledger technology. There's no doubt about it. And when we actually have production at scale, you'll hear a lot more about it on this show. But I certainly don't mind hearing Greg's ideas about it, because I love hearing more about the industry use cases. I mean, you guys have to understand with the blockchain thing that about 4 years ago, I went to a show where I was told that blockchain was going to be bigger than the internet itself. So I'm still working my way down from the Mount Everest of that hype factor into what I think of as the future of blockchain, which is one more tool in your toolkit that you would approach in a very sober manner, along with many other tools to figure out if it's the right tool for your job.
And we may not be able to because it's linked with cryptocurrency craze. It just may be.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not magic. It's not magic, and it requires some investment and understanding it. And it has not been presented thoroughly as, hey, this is really a technological solution that is better than other ones. It's been magic.
And the other really interesting thing, Kurt Marco, if you guys follow his stuff on Diginomica, he does a really excellent job on the more tech side of analysis on our site. He just did a piece on Oracle's use of blockchain in a security context to enhance security in some of their database functions. So that's a really good example of taking some of the blockchain characteristics and applying it to an existing problem, which I think is, and when that happens, that's a productive use case right now. But again, that's not about revolutionary technology. It's about getting better and using every tool at your disposal to get better, which unfortunately is not nearly as sexy. Thomas wants me to invite Jeremy Epstein to my show, quite an outspoken advocate of blockchain and marketing and ad tech. Oh, that sounds like he and I would get along great. I love ad tech as well. So that's going to be really, really, really perfect for me. So thanks Thomas for that. So do you guys have any last questions for Greg? I think Thomas was really curious to hear more about the construction of ships. Let me see what his question was there, whether you can actually answer without getting in trouble. His question was more about different pricing and the planning of building a big ship. I don't know if there's anything there you want to touch on, but
it's a pretty amazing process. I was in the Navy before I got involved in all this mess, and having lived on a ship and having to be dependent upon it all coming together, it gave me a different perspective when I finally started working with Newport News. So when I go on the ships and I see all this, there's a thread of how it all ties together, which is pretty amazing. The design starts, and I think the Ford aircraft carrier was 12 years from design. Oh, so you're a Navy guy too. But it was 12 years from design to where they had the ship floating.
It's amazing.
It's just an amazing feat. And we're all, no matter what industry you're in, contracts are executed in different ways. And the government and the Department of Defense have a specific way. So when you're building things, each contract's unique. And even if you're using common materials, it's tied to the contract. So you want to make sure, because everybody wants to get paid, that you line it up so that it is correct for the contract purposes. And it's one of those things where people look at some of the DoD processes and they're like, oh, that's crazy. It may be. Some of them are out of whack completely. But at the end of the day, a lot of them really tie back to, delivering what was asked for correctly. And so some of the functionality, and SAP provides some pretty good functionality. Give them a little bit of a plug. The grouping, pegging, and distribution functionality and their MRP stuff is super strong. So that's almost an industry-specific thing for us that you can't function. You can't build a ship in the modern world, and I would think it would apply to aircraft, but I don't know that as a fact, without being able to figure out what needs to be where from your MRP perspective, and making sure that when it's consumed, you track it well and price it correctly. So the billions of parts involved in these major defense systems, it just gets so complex that without having some really strong background IT systems, it wouldn't work. That plus the people who understand how it has to fit. They can see a problem that shows up. That's what's unique about our workforce is it doesn't matter where you are on the deck plates, whether you're a welder or whatever, everybody's tasked with kind of the quality perspective, and they'll recognize things that aren't within, I like to think it's universal across our company that every shipbuilder looks at it this way. They'll recognize things that don't seem to be aligned with, whatever they're working on. And it's pretty easy to call it out. And our systems support that. And these things are so big and have to work. Speaking as a Navy guy who lived on a ship, who had some ships that didn't work and we're out in the middle of the Atlantic, it wasn't a really fun feeling.
No, I would think not. I would think not at all. So Greg, I mean, you've been at this ERP thing for a long time. How do you kind of keep yourself kind of fresh? You seem to have a lot of fresh ideas and thoughts and concepts. How do you keep on the edge of everything for yourself?
Professionally, I've been very affiliated with SAP. So I've, with ERP tips
Yep.
and all that, that's one of the reasons I did that was so I could stay connected. I'm lucky to have a really strong network within that I can reach out and work with that. Other than that, personally, I like to challenge myself. So when new technologies and things come along, like I didn't know much about cloud, so I started getting into AWS components and talked to people that I knew that was at AWS and ended up going ahead and working to get certified as a solution architect and still do some dabbling and helping some people out with like storefront companies and some lamp stuff. But mostly it's just being interested in the cutting edge. And, that's one of the reasons I will give a plug for Diginomica is there are things I'm not aware of. When I read Diginomica, it's like, that's interesting. And depending on where I am in my cycle of I have energy to explore or I don't have energy to explore, it's like one of the sources that I'll go find out. So mostly it's an innate curiosity and a willingness to review and examine things. So really just, I like to do it. So I do it.
Yeah, I like that model of you have this core thing you're really good at, but you're always trying to spike it up with new ideas. And I think that's kind of how ERP guys stay interesting to me. Sounds like we're starting to get some domestic interruptions over there, Greg. We got my first animal interruption in the history of the show. This is exciting. Excellent.
Yeah. Nelson the dog was in here and he was getting ready to bark, and
oh, Nelson, cool.
So some other person was outside the door and he wanted to be out there with them.
So I mean, I don't know what you all think about this thing, but it's pretty cool because here I am going on a rant about why cloud ERP needs to be vertical, and then lo and behold, I got a vertical ERP fellow on my chat to talk about the importance of vertical and A&D. So that's pretty awesome because I think that is really the future, to your point. And you have that in your industry, but in a lot of industries that doesn't exist yet, and it needs to. I think if these ERP vendors are going to live up to their bold claims that they're driving transformation.
I also think the use of cloud across the board, there's lots of I'm trying not to use a word that'll get me yelled at. Lots of commonality in focus of where the cloud is actually more secure than an on-prem system, and where the risks are, and how do we build out areas that can be shared by common groups, like the Gov Cloud in both Azure flavors and the AWS. I might not have the terms exactly right.
Yeah.
Those that work with the government may be surprised. They've actually done a pretty good job at trying to pull together a framework that allows agencies, contractors to work in it. I think that has a lot of potential for, you're only as good as your weakest IAM group, whether you have the most secure cloud infrastructure or not. If you don't protect your cloud assets by explicitly finding the vulnerabilities, and those are the biggest one is who you let in with permissions, because it's complex and none of the cloud stuff comes magically. You've got to go learn it and you've got to go deploy it correctly. And many people get enamored of how rapid it can be or how quick I can deploy a solution without looking at there's still the fundamental principles of cybersecurity, user identity access management. But if you ignore that, it doesn't matter how cool your functionality is, it's at risk. And I think actually all the cloud hyperscalers in the past couple of years have actually focused on, we can't do that for you. Here's the principles you need to follow. And if you read the documentation that Google, I'll mention Google, Azure, and Amazon put out, all of it is extensive and gives you enough information that if you take the time to learn it, you can probably set a cloud system up that is secure as your on-prem, but you've got to do the work. And a lot of times that's just not sexy, classy work. It's grunt work. It's going in and digging through and building out that foundation correctly. When most people want to hit a button and get a fancy app that gives me analytics and magically fixes my biggest business problem.
Well, and to your point, one of the, I'm always in enterprise hits and misses. Security breaches and cloud security are a theme just about every week. And right now we have this Microsoft Exchange hack issue where there's 30,000 businesses in North America alone that have now been inflicted with this hostile malware shell. And the Krebs on security is talking about how anyone who doesn't get these systems updated, they're going to get a mass ransomware hit pretty quick here, and that's going to be really miserable. And a lot of these are public service organizations and things like that. And what have they done? Well, they've fallen behind on patching. And to your point, like the lack of sophistication around that is really dangerous. And but as I do remind people sometimes, Brent Snowden walked out with a thumb drive with a lot of stuff on it too. So security is a multifaceted thing, but I think one things you bring up, Greg, which is probably a topic I should do a whole show on, is this whole notion of security by design, which is like, why can't we have this conversation about security interwoven in all of our conversations, right? And I would include data privacy in that as well. Why can't that just be part of everything we do? I've had a lot of arguments with vendors about that because I had one prominent vendor tell me, oh, well, we're not going to bring up security on the main stage because that's just an invitation to be hacked. And I was like, oh, come on. Like, you have to bring this stuff up. I didn't say like, go up there and say, oh, we're an impenetrable fortress. We dare you to hack. I didn't say that, but I was saying like, it's time to just bring this up and get out in front of it and say, we care about this and we're working on it. And also from Greg, to your point, from a customer's perspective, what are you doing to make sure that you've dealt with these configurations? Because a lot of the default configurations are not secure enough. So anyway, it's an ongoing conversation and we should definitely have it on this show as well. So very good, man. Well, I like how you danced around a few topics so you wouldn't get in trouble with your PR people. So that was good. And it's really, really nice to have a chance to talk to you. It's been a long time. I used to love editing your articles back in the day. So
thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad I don't know, a few weeks ago, I said, I need to start doing this. And the timing's good. It's Friday afternoons and gives me a chance to unwind a little bit intellectually.
Absolutely. Well, we'll definitely have you on again. I want to thank my commenters for joining this impromptu session. I've got a really fun one next week on cloud projects and dealing with cloud vendors and negotiating tactics. And one of the big themes there is that, hey, cloud vendors are a pain in the ass too. And, there's no dream on the other side of this. It's just a different form of lock-in. But on that inspiring note, let's head off into the better weather for those of us that have finally achieved that. For those of you that haven't, I don't know what to tell you. Hopefully you'll get it soon. It's so much warmer here than it has been, so feeling kind of happy about that. Probably for you too, right, Greg? A little bit nicer there.
Oh yeah, it was a gorgeous day. Perfect.
All right. Well, I hope Nelson gets outside again. And have a great night. Thanks for joining. Bye, everyone. I'll catch you next Friday. See you later.